Hi, welcome to One Eye on the Page. I'm Scott. Today we're doing our second part of Five-Year Battle, Stephen King. Last time we went through 1974 through 78. We're going to be doing 79 through 83 this time. Five-Year Battle! This is actually King's most prolific 5-year time frame. So we're going to be going over 13 books. The Dead Zone. The Dead Zone is about John Smith or Johnny Smith, an English teacher who gets into an accident and is in a coma and comes out of the coma with the ability to see the future, basically. At first, it manifests itself in small ways, being able to tell if somebody else may be in an accident or if there may be a fire, etc. But he runs into another character, Greg Stilson, who is running for, I believe, governor. I may be incorrect on that. But Johnny sees that he will someday become president and that there are consequences to that. This is probably King's most well plotted novel. It's underrated, honestly. A lot of people kind of say The Stand or It is King's best book. And I'm not saying that The Dead Zone is better than either one of those, at least not yet, but it rarely gets mentioned. And I think it's just an excellent book all around. And if you have not read it, you should definitely read it. So obviously, since this is the first book, it's going to be in first place. Firestarter. I liked the book when I first read it. If you don't know about the book, it's about a girl, Charlie McGee, and her father. They're on the run from the government because they have powers. He can get people to do what he wants, basically, although it comes at a risk to his own health. And she can set fires. So it's basically about them being on the run, and then at one point they are captured, and it's about them trying to escape. I liked it a lot when I first read it. Over the years, there are just troubles with it. John Rainbeard character is super creepy, quite honestly, especially, the way we look at things differently now than we did back in the 80s. As a book, it's mediocre. It's not horrible, it's not great. I don't really have a lot else to say about it. Characters that I used to like in it, I don't particularly care for anymore. Considering how big a part in the novel Charlie has, I don't think she's particularly well developed character. And that's all I have to say about that. For right now, it's going to be ranked number 2. Cujo. Oh, this is a little bit inverse of Firestarter because when I first read Cujo, I didn't particularly like it. In large part because the ending of the novel, and if you've read the novel, you understand what I referring to, and I won't spoil it if you don't. Cujo is about a dog named Cujo uh, who gets rabies, and he's a very good dog at first, but of course the rabies affects him. There is some supernatural elements kind of pushed in here that quite honestly I don't feel needed to be pushed. I could have just had a dog with rabies, and I feel like King felt, because he was known as a horror writer, that he had to push those elements. And I think a dog with rabies killing people was horrifying enough. Every cat is in here now, practically. Um, so, but I've come to like it more over the years. Not a fan of the ending, but I understand the ending. And if you've seen the movie, the ending is different than the book, and that was a choice that I don't know was actually better, although it makes you feel better at the end, but maybe doesn't make it a better movie. This was written during a time in which King was in a very addictive point. He says that he doesn't even remember writing this book. It's that could, you know, have something to do with how the book reads. It's a little bit darker than some of his other books, more pessimistic. Even though it's not a book that I have read too much, at least when it comes to King books, I still think it's a very good book. I'm going to rank this number 2 right now, behind Dead Zone and in front of Firestarter. Book number 4, Danse Macabre. A lot of people probably don't know this book because, one, it's a nonfiction book, and two, it's in some ways, and I'm not saying in a bad way, but in some ways it reads like something you've written for your PhD. It basically covers horror, including movies, TV, and books from the 1950s to the 1980s, although obviously some books that he covers in here go before the 1950s. As a nonfiction book, it's an excellent book. I love this book. I understand that it's not going to be a lot of people's cup of tea. I think he should write a follow up, or if not a follow up, a revised edition. I really think he should write a follow up because I think he can do a lot for stuff between 1980 and now. So I don't believe that that's ever going to happen, but I do think it's an idea. There's not really a lot to say about this. I advise you to read it if you care about horror at all. King is excellent at writing nonfiction. So I am going to place this, because it's a nonfiction book and it's also a book that I don't read as often, I'm going to place it ahead of Firestarter, but behind Cujo for now. Creepshow, basically like the EC Comics version of the movie, which was based on EC Comics. It is drawn by Bernie Wrightson, who has had a history with King, worked several different works in 5 stories that some of them you can find in other places in written form. Some of them have also not been collected into any his short story collections. So this is the only place you can find it, unless you find like individual like magazines or periodicals that he published on them. Because it's a comic book, it's not going to rank as high up for me. I do think that it's still better than Firestarter. And I have to tell you, when I'm ranking these, I do not know how I am ranking them before I actually go over them. So I did not think that Firestarter was going to be this low down already. And I haven't even gone over the rest of the books yet. And I'm going to be in real trouble when we get the Bachman books, because there are 3 Bachman books that were published between 1979 and 83, and I actually have to go over one of them next because I forgot Long Walk came out in 79, so I will go out on that next. But I didn't expect Firestarter to be this low, but this is going to be just above Firestarter. You should definitely read it if you can, especially after watching the movie. I'm going to go ahead and go over the 3 remaining Bachman books. We did Rage in the last video. The next one is The Long Walk. Long Walk is about a long walk, about a group of 100 boys who basically are doing a race. They have to walk, maintaining a speed of 4 miles per hour until all of them except for one have been eliminated. It's slightly spoilerish to tell you this, but not much. You can kind of figure out how they get eliminated. To me, The Long Walk is the best of the Bachman books. There is some immaturity to the, not to the writing, I wouldn't say, but to the dialogue. There is some immaturity. It was also written when King was younger, but I still think it's an awesome book. As with pretty much all his Bachman books, it's much darker than when he writes under his own name. You're not going to really find a happy ending here or in any of the Bachman books. I'm going to rank this one second right now behind the Dead Zone. We will next go to Roadwork. It's not good. I mentioned in Night Shift a story that was written, I believe, The Woman in the Room, after King's mother died. This was written around that same time frame, and I think perhaps that it kind of gets the same melancholy approach. It's not particularly violent overall, but it's probably, to me at least, the darkest of the Bachman books. It there's it's a man trying to stop road work from being done. He has lost his son. It's just not good. I will say that this was probably the worst book of King's, at least up until the 2000s. And I'm not saying that there are books from the 2000s that are worse than this. There might be, but there might also not be. Read it if you want to be a completist, and I don't find a lot of merit to it otherwise. This is my personal opinion. You could tell me I'm wrong. That's fine. It's just not, this is something I've read maybe 3 times, and one time was a few years ago when I decided I'm going to read all of King's work. So, not something that I would read again. The Running Man. If you've seen the movie, the novel is much different than the movie. The movie is very campy. The novel is not campy at all. There's not much humor to it. I believe he says he wrote that like within 72 hours, and it feels like that, not in a bad way. And by the way, road work, bottom of the pile under Firestarter. I didn't mention that. It's a good novel, as with other Bachman books. Not a particularly, and I'm going to put this down because I think it's glaring, not a particularly lighthearted novel. I'm going to place it above Firestarter. Again, if you've seen the movie, and obviously I believe more people have seen the movie than read the book. If you've seen the movie, don't go into it expecting the movie. The movie is fun on its own, but like I said with The Shining, if you're looking for an adaptation of the novel, it fails. But it can't be fun on its own. I So when we do go to the final rankings, I will have to remember these because obviously since these aren't individual books, physically, I can't stack them like I am with the other ones. Okay, now we got a little bit of perhaps controversy with the Dark Tower, the Gunslinger. Simply because the Dark Tower was published in 1982, but it was only published in a limited release. It was not actually released until outside of our 5 year range, but I am including it in this because even though it was a limited release, it was still released. Dark Tower, the Gunslinger, is the first book in a 7 book series, although we also have a book written after the end of the series that you could put in the middle of the series. So a total of 8 books, and many, many books outside the series that allude to it too. So I will step back in time, mention that the Dead Zone was the first time that King is self-referential in his books that I recall. I may miss something because he refers back to Carrie in that book. And again, as he goes through the years, he will refer back to his own work, but particularly the Dark Tower. In the Dark Tower, will play roles in several of his books, which we will get into when we mention them. But the Dark Tower of the Gunslinger is the start. I'm going to say I don't know that it's the worst book in the series. There may be some call for a couple of the final books, but not the final book. I probably will have a controversial opinion on that because I probably like that more than you do. He didn't really plot out everything beforehand, so this was stuff that he started writing in college. And the first book is about Roland of Gilead, a gunslinger, the last gunslinger. Basically, he's on a quest to find the Dark Tower. In this story, which involves 5 stories that he published in fantasy and science fiction magazine about his quest to get there. And it obviously 7 books. It doesn't end with him getting to Dark Tower, but there are some very important scenes in here, especially with Jake. And of course, there's the Man in Black, one of the best starting sentences in any novel. The Man in Black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed. It is a good introduction, not a great introduction. My daughter, Robin, who read this book, didn't particularly like it, hasn't gone on to read any of the other Dark Tower books despite my pushing them, especially, when you get to the next book, The Drawing of the Three, which is amazing and has, when Roland gets his crew together is when it really starts to get better. But that's in the future. This one, I'm going to put it under Cujo. I know Stand By Me stands out there, but it's Different Seasons by Stephen King. You know this, although you may not know it as Different Seasons, because you know it. The Body, which became the movie Stand By Me, and Rita Hayworth in Shawshank Redemption, which became the Shawshank Redemption. And perhaps you've also seen Apt Pupil. So 3 movies that were made from the 4 novellas in here. There is also The Breathing Method. I'm not going to get into The Body in Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption because chances are you know the stories. Apt Pupil is about a young boy who discovers a Nazi in his community and they form a strange relationship. That's a very dark one. Some people believe that's the best novella in this book. Obviously, some people think Rita Hayworth and Shawshank Redemption or The Body are. I'm actually going to go out on a limb and say that my favorite novella in this is The Breathing Method. It's the shortest, it's the only one that really has elements of horror in it, but I love the heart in it. I love the club. In the club that the narrator goes to, this and only one other short story does appear, and I wish that King had done more stories, but this book is excellent all around. He's had other books in the future in which there were like 4 novellas or longer works within it. They have varying degrees of success. All hits, no misses. This is my number 1 book for 79 to 83. I have books left. I don't think it's going to be surpassed. Number 1 book. This book looks awful. I'm sorry, but it's Christine. Christine, I believe, is the first novel that I read by King. As I mentioned last video, not the first fiction I read from him because The Boogeyman and The Mangler were the first ones, but I believe this is the first novel. I have a lot of sentimentality for this novel. I also have hindsight. I look back at it and it's not as good as I thought it was at the beginning of my King reading experience, but there's still a lot of good about this. Boy meets car, boy meets girl, boy loses girl, car is a death machine. I don't know. But there are things I don't like. The characters aren't very multidimensional. I don't like King's choice to have it written in first person in the first section and the third section, but third person in the second section. I used to read this book a lot. I don't read it that much anymore, but I still really like it. And I think if you have any type of fascination with cars, check this out. I like that pretty much every chapter opens up with a musical quote from about cars. So I'm going to place this above Cujo. I think maybe Cujo is a better book, maybe. But this is my opinion, and better doesn't necessarily make it more of a favorite. So I'm going to put this after Dead Zone and above Cujo. Pet Cemetery. I don't read this often. This is a depressing novel. This could pretty much be a Bachman book. Quick synopsis. Family moves someplace. They're located next to a pet cemetery. Apparently, if you bury something in the pet cemetery, it can come back to life, but it's not always the same as before it died. So, I won't go into spoilers on this. The only thing I will say is if you are a parent, you may not like this book. It may hit you hard. This is a well written book. Characters are pretty much unlikable, except possibly for Ellie. Even Judson, the next door neighbor, who, when I first read it, I was like, he's a great sage. And you know, you reread it and, like, you know what? Judson's not that good either. Read it once, at least. Maybe you'll like it more than I do. I'm ranking these how I like them. If I was ranking them on, if I were trying to rank it on an objective view, which obviously is hard to do with books, of like how well it's written and plotted and etc., I may place this up higher, but I am going to put this under Cujo. That's probably a controversial opinion. Lots of people have Pet Cemetery in their top 10, top 5. It's not so for me. Cycle of the Werewolf. It's okay. I mean, this was originally supposed to be written as a calendar. Obviously, werewolf, every full moon, everything. I believe it was written with that in mind, and it never really changed. It's basic. I'm gonna place it. I wish I could say more about it. It would have been probably more impactful for me if it was included as part of a short story collection. It's what, 128 pages, and some of that is illustrations. So it's a novella at best. And as a novella standing alone, and maybe someday I will rank novellas and or short stories, it's not much. The characters aren't much. I'm sure if King had decided to make it a novel, probably would have been a better book, but I am going to rank it under Creepshow. My final rankings for the years 1979 to 1983. Number 1, Different Seasons. Number 2, Dead Zone. Number 3, The Long Walk. Uh, Number 4, Christine. Number 5, Cujo. Number 6, The Running Man. Number 7, Pet Cemetery. Number 8, The Dark Tower of the Gunslinger. Number 9, Danse Macabre. Number 10, Creepshow. Number 11, Cycle of the Werewolf. Number 12, Firestarter. And coming at the bottom of the barrel, and possibly the bottom of the barrel for all of King's work, we shall see, Roadwork. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this, or even if you didn't. And I will talk to you next time.